Hey guys and girls, today we are jumping on with my old coach and friend CJ Del Balso. He's already there. Let's go ahead and get him on. Connect real quick. Hey man, how's it going?
Oh, good. How are you today?
Good, good. We're slowly kind of getting back to getting our gyms opened up and trying to figure out how to navigate that. What about you guys?
We are not open yet. I've heard that commercial facilities and private facilities maybe it might be soon, but because I
Yeah.
work out of a school, mine's going to be probably different than that.
Oh
We don't
yeah, yeah.
operate
You're
under
probably
the
gonna be
same.
much. Yeah, you're gonna be the last one to probably come around, huh?
It could be a while still, yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I'm assuming at least with the school they'll have like some pretty good guidelines and everything lined out before opening up, where we're all just kind of trying to figure it out on our own.
Yeah, they will. That is the one benefit. They'll kind of lay out the rules beforehand, and we'll know where we stand. But it's
Yeah.
pretty. It changes by the day almost, it seems. So I don't know where we stand as of today.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Even here, like obviously they're lifting things very quickly here in Texas, but it's still like we don't even really know when they're gonna make a change. We just kind
Hmm.
of, hope to tune in at the right time and be like, okay, now you can go to 25%. Okay, now you can go to 50%. And so it's just kind of all over the place. But it's luckily with weightlifting, it's been pretty easy because I can just assign one person to a platform, just make them
Hmm.
stay there. And then we've just been doing like 2 hour time slots. So once they're done, clean everything, head out, next person comes in. So it's pretty easy to like keep distance and keep everything clean in weightlifting. I can't imagine trying to like monitor a bunch of kids or some other sport, contact sport or anything like that.
Oh yeah, like our football coach is trying to figure out make plans for when they can start. And what are you going to do? Like
Yeah.
tackling drills and blocking drills and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't know
Yeah,
how it's
yeah,
all going to work
exactly.
out.
So I wanted to jump on here today because you have a pretty extensive background in developing school programs and working with youth, and I thought that you'd be a really good resource to kind of get
Mhm.
some ins and outs on that. But for those who don't know, you've been in the game probably longer than most of us. You actually pretty much introduced weightlifting to me. You were my first coach here in Texas when you were here working with the Lone Star Club and
Yeah.
got me started in weightlifting and really kind of got my career going. You've always kind of been a go-to mentor for me, and when I had
Mhm.
questions, I've come to you with them. So you've been like a big part of weightlifting and Texas weightlifting for a long time before even getting to where you're at now. Why don't you just give us like a quick kind of like brief background in what your how you got into weightlifting and what you've done kind of with the different schools and programs.
Okay. Well, I just finished this is my 18th year in education this year. So I actually, when I first got into all this, I don't have the typical, weightlifter pedigree. I wasn't a former, international level weightlifter guy that then transitioned into coaching weightlifting. I actually had no intention on coaching weightlifting when I first got into teaching and coaching. My life's dream when I first started out was to be a head football coach. So when I started out teaching and coaching, it was all about the football thing, because I was a high school and college football player, and uh, and then I also had gotten into strength and conditioning kind of right at the outset. I was kind of like the guy that knew more about the weight room than anybody else, like usually in the football program. So it fell on me. So I started kind of gravitating towards that stuff right away. But still, weightlifting wasn't on the radar for the first like 6 years, six,
Yeah.
7 years that I was actually in education. I actually kind of it's a funny story. We're doing a personal workout at the gym, and it was here in Southern California at the time when I was still here, and I was working at a private school down in South Orange County, and the local weightlifting president at that time was working out right next to me and saw me doing a set of back squats. Hey, you look like you know what you're doing, and he talked to me about weightlifting, how he was the local weightlifting president, and he convinced me to take the level 1 course to to
That's
kind of
awesome.
look into it more, and I did, and then he, you should start, because he knew I worked at a school, and he convinced me to start my first program. That was actually the one before Texas. That was called Ironman Weightlifting, and that was my first
Mhm.
program. So that's kind of how it all started. But I got into this, I was 28 years old when I first really got into the sport, and what I tell people is I didn't know the extent of my coaching in high school was, first of all, I taught myself how to do a clean. I started lifting like in about eighth grade. I actually had a really good home gym. My dad and mom are chiropractors, and we had like a full blown free weight setup. It was actually a whole basement that we had, so I had a good
That's
operation. But
awesome.
I didn't.
Yeah.
But there was no internet back then. When I
Yeah.
started, I had this good as by Doc Christ. It was an old strength and conditioning book for football players, and that's how I learned how to do it clean. Then I got to high school. The extent of my teaching was, watch this guy over here do it. He's pretty
Yeah.
good, and just do what he does. And
Oh yeah.
honestly, it wasn't much.
It was so
Yeah,
different prior to, internet, because even me, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there, but I luckily had like you as a resource who had been around it. But yeah, I mean, trying to learn by just looking at like pictures and still
yeah,
shots. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So, and it wasn't much different in college. So, make a long story short, I went, 7, 8 years of not ever learning how to do a clean or a snatch, right? Basically self-taught, or,
Hmm.
limited, just get the weight up. And I came into weightlifting with a lot of bad habits because I didn't know, I never had the benefit of having a good teacher. So when I got into weightlifting, that's when I started learning how to do the movements right. And one thing that helped me is that knowing all the bad stuff that I learned, I worked really hard on learning the lifts myself, kind of alongside the kids right at that time. And,
Yeah.
I was working on the side, trying to figure, like, I wanted to figure it out for myself. And that helped me understand like what, you know, the endless amount of very average kids are going through that I'm trying to teach on a daily basis. And that process has kind of built itself over the years now to where we've gotten to today. So
Yeah, that's
now,
cool. I think that's a huge thing for coaches. I've always said a coach doesn't need to be the best weightlifter out there, but they do need to have experienced the lifts, because I think you having to go through the process of learning makes you a better instructor as well.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I already knew by the time I even got into weightlifting, I was a broken man. I mean, I had years of, because I did a good combination of violent sports. I was a football player, a wrestler, and a freestyle skier, and I was messed up. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I had a total hip replacement 2 years ago at the age of 40, and it's just, I knew when I got in, my ship has sailed. I didn't have any dreams of
Yeah.
being a great weightlifter or anything like that. I just wanted to learn the lifts proficiently as I could at that point so I could teach the people that I'm working with. And that's kind of the focus from day one, has always been on my kids and the kids that I'm coaching. But I did find the value in learning the lifts, and actually doing that. The last competition I did was the one where you coached me at the Texas State meet right
Oh
before we
yeah.
left.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I thought that was an important part of the process as well. As it's kind of like the culminating activity there of this process, and it was a fun time. But
Yeah. Yeah, you had a
but
pretty good meet that day too.
yeah, it was good. It was a good day.
Yeah.
But since then, so I moved to Texas. I had the Lone Star weightlifting program. That was
Hmm.
through another private school. And in both those first two programs, I had about 25 kids that were doing weightlifting. My first program, a little tiny school, 200 kids. And amazingly, out of that first program, I had two international level weightlifters
Wow.
that, started from scratch and ended up making world teams out of this tiny school of 200 kids. And
That's
then
awesome.
then went to the school in Texas where we met. And then
Hmm.
since coming back, I came back to California in 2015, and now I work for a big public school called Beckman High School. It's about 3,100 kids. I'm the head strength and conditioning coach and a full-time PE teacher there, and that's where I run the weightlifting club out of.
Yeah, it's been cool seeing, because I've been following you since you moved out there, and it's been really cool to see. You can literally, because we have the internet now, we have like things like Instagram. You can see that gym and that program like growing as you've been there.
Mm-hmm.
It's been really cool seeing new kids pop up on there, and more and more athletes jumping in on that. That's really cool. So that kind of leads into like first question for those that might be interested in trying to get like a school program going. Like, what is this process? You've now been through like a few schools now where you've been able to start up a weightlifting program. What does that process kind of look like, and how have you been able to successfully do that?
I get asked this question a lot by people wanting to do it, and unfortunately, the first answer is the one that it's very difficult because you need to be. I mean, if you're really serious about it, you're going to want to get a teaching credential
Hmm.
so that you're working in the school. I mean, that's always been the case with me. I've always been working in the school system
Yeah.
as a teacher and coach. I'm there all day long, and that's what's given me access to the kids and being able to build these programs. Um, that's the ideal route if you can make
Yeah.
that happen, and it provides you with a good stable income and you don't have to worry about where money's coming in from.
Hmm.
If that's not realistic for you, which many people watching it probably isn't, then you've got to look at other options. Just coming in from the outside and trying to get kids, I tell you that doesn't usually work with schools.
Yeah.
um, I'd say you need to like kind of work your way into the school somehow, probably in a volunteer capacity, whether it's helping with one of the sport teams, so you
Hmm.
build a relationship with at least one program, or if
Yeah.
they have a strength and conditioning program, which most schools don't. But maybe helping there, just volunteering with, if they have a strength and conditioning coach, offering to help out, and just working into the school, so you start, uh, building relationships with the kids, and they know who you are, that you're a regular person and not just some person from the outside, trying to come in and get people
Yeah.
to do stuff, like a
Yeah.
club
Yeah. That
sport
usually
coach or
gets met.
something like that.
That usually gets shut off pretty quickly. But that's a
Yes,
great. Yeah. Yeah. Start looking into volunteering jobs. That's awesome. That's a great approach.
because that's how I don't now. I just do strength and conditioning and weightlifting. I mean, I'm in the weight room all day long, but that
Yeah.
wasn't the case for the first 13 years that I was working. I was a football coach for 13 years. That's how I got all my first batch of kids, was through the football team, because they all
Yeah.
knew me. They worked with me in the weight room. I was doing the strength and conditioning as well. And that's how I got the kids. And even Texas, I still coached. It was a little bit less. I still coached in junior high football, but I was still kind of a part of the school culture a lot, where I worked at the school full time, and I was coaching another sport and doing the weight room stuff. So it wasn't just weightlifting, and that's how I
Yeah.
built those relationships and was able to get kids to buy in and come into the program.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's good advice. Um, so with kids in like other sports like football and stuff like that, how do you kind of navigate that with weightlifting? I think there's sometimes the fear that they shouldn't be doing more than just like a hang power clean if they're football players, and they should primarily be doing like the combine type movements. Like what do you find to be like a benefit of these kids that do other sports getting into something like weightlifting?
Well, it helps just the dynamic nature of the movements, especially if you're learning a full movement from the floor. I mean, it really improves just overall proprioception
Hmm.
and just general athletic skills. A good story I tell, because I teach the USAW certification courses as well, and story I like to tell is our football coach. We have a lot of our school is a very academic, kind of nerdy population. So we have a lot of really average, below average kids, and a lot of them, unfortunately, are comprised on our football team. So, he calls all these kids, like, they might never see the field ever. He calls
Yeah.
them the nons, for non-athletics, basically. But, every year it's the same thing. They come in and they can barely do anything.
Hmm.
And, we teach them the movements the same way as everybody else. And it's like, he'll come to me like in the spring, like it was like a couple years ago, he came, he's like, man, the nons are incredible. They're jumping over
That's
bags
awesome.
that are like 3 feet tall. These are kids that could barely, tie their shoes at the
Yeah.
beginning of the year. And it's just an example of how it transfers just building general athletic skills.
Hmm.
There's other things you could do, certainly, but just getting under that barbell and learning the movements and the technique, it really helps with that. you
Yeah,
know,
I think you're right. So, like you said, you can do other things to kind of develop athleticism, but I think one of the benefits of like the weightlifting movements is you actually aren't having to teach them a whole lot because it's primarily snatch, clean, and jerk, and then some accessory work. But it not only is going to get them more athletic, but they're going to increase their mobility, their bone density,
yeah.
their strength is going to go up. And so there's just a lot of bang for the buck in just kind of really learning those couple movements. And so when you have limited time with an athlete, like I think you're right, you tend to get a lot out of teaching them snatch and clean and jerk.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I teach even my PE kids how to do this stuff. I mean, these are the most
that's awesome.
below average human beings you could possibly find. And, there's just, saying that it's too hard to teach large groups or anything like that. I mean, that's just not, it's not the
Yep.
reality. I mean, if you know how to
Yeah.
teach, you can get it done. It's really comes down to an issue of how good you are at teaching. And if you're
Hmm.
patient and willing to go through the process, it's really not that hard.
Yeah,
I just,
it's funny to me when people talk about like the bread and butter of like weightlifting being the coaches being able to work like one on one, two on one, and things like that. But then they also don't hesitate to like fill up a seminar with 20 people. I'm like, if you can
mhm.
teach a seminar of 20 people, you can teach a group of people how to weightlift.
Yeah, exactly.
That being said, so I'm assuming most of your kids and kids all the time are doing other sports along with weightlifting. What's kind of like your recommendation for maybe how many times a week they're going to be training? Do you do pretty much all snatch and clean and jerk? Do you work in some of the accessory lifts? And what's kind of your maybe prescription for a youth weightlifter?
Well, actually, having kids do other sports is how it used to be for me. It's not the case anymore. Like my school is so big now. I'm at a
Mm.
point where actually I pull most of my kids out of PE. There's a lot of kids at my
Oh
school
wow,
that are really talented that do no sports, and it's just so much less of a hassle at this point.
that's nice.
So I'm fortunate that most of my kids they just do weightlifting. I have a few that do track and field and a couple other things, but I'm at a point now where the kids I have the strength and conditioning side of things where I'm dealing with the general athletes and
Hmm.
they do the weightlifting movements within that, but then the weightlifters specifically work out. They're on a separate program and they just do weightlifting, so I don't have to worry as much about that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
nice.
my advice, if going back to starting a school program, this kind of goes with it, is don't mess up or interfere with the sports program. That's another
Yeah,
way to build a program. Make sure you're not getting torpedoed before you start. If you start
yeah,
interfering and causing problems with the sport program, it's not a battle you're going to win. Especially like in Texas, if you start interfering with high school football, I mean, there's nothing that will kill your program faster than that.
yeah,
That's
yeah. You
you're
get kicked out of Texas.
yeah, you're not going to win that battle, so there's no point in even attempting to do it. And it's just good, smart business. I mean, just
Yeah,
knowing the realities of things and just working around it and being smart, not just being, oh, you got to do my stuff and that's it, and
yeah,
screw the other sports.
yeah, yeah, for
That
sure.
just doesn't work that way. So you got to work with the sport coaches, and if they're doing a sport, you got to be flexible in terms of what they're doing.
Hmm.
In terms of,
And then
can
you,
you repeat your question again with the kids as far as?
yeah. So then,
Yeah.
so then your kids now so your youth kids now that are just doing weightlifting, how many days a week are they training? How long are those sessions? What are you kind of doing with your full time weightlifters?
Okay. So when I answer this question, it's important to understand like all of my answers to these questions right now for me are going to be very contextual to my situation. Because I'm working my weightlifting kids in amongst my regular strength and conditioning duties during my normal work hours. So imagine I have 50 to 100 kids in the weight room, including the weightlifters,
Golly.
like all the time. I have assistant coaches helping me, but it's not, like I just have the weightlifting team in there. So
Sorry, real quick though, what age groups are you working with? Like,
what's
what
that?
is, what age groups are you working with? Are you in the school? Are you going all the way up through high school? Is
Yeah,
this
primarily 14 to 8. It's a high school. It's a public high school. So 14 to
okay?
18. I do have one kid that's been with me for several years that's in the district, but he's in junior high now. He started at 8 years old. And then
Okay.
my daughter does it as well. But other
Yeah.
than those, my daughter and that kid, everybody else is high school age. So because that's just where I'm at all day long.
Yeah. Sorry.
So
Now back to kind of how many days a week are they training? What do those training sessions look like as far as like maybe duration and frequency?
okay. So yeah, when I make a program, I have to start with like when and what's available because I might have the football team in there using all the racks or they're on the platforms to start. So
Mm.
it's like a jigsaw puzzle that I got to put together, with all the sports seasons and I fit the weightlifters in around that. So I'm not in an ideal situation where I can just bring them in and we're going to do whatever we want. It's
Yeah.
very, I have it down now pretty well where it's all planned out and the weightlifters get, good priority on the stuff that they need, but it's still, they got to work around all the other things, but they train currently 4 days a week. It's kind of got that down to like the standard days that we go. It's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday is what our regular
Nice.
schedule is. I limit it to my normal work days. We don't do anything on the weekends because the weightlifting side of things I don't charge the kids anything. So, just to keep things balanced, I'm a family man, and
Yeah.
weightlifting is a labor of love, but I keep boundaries there. So I'm not up there on the weekends too. And so we work it all in while during my normal work hours, which makes it a little bit
That's good.
challenging. But I'd say
Yeah.
with beginner, with kids, and I'd say for adults too, 3 to 4 days a week, probably at the most when they're first starting out, just because it's more of
Yeah.
an experience issue than an age issue. You don't need to start adding days that early, really, for
Yeah.
either age
Yeah.
group. So I would say there's not a big difference there in terms of the days you're going to go, 3 to 4 days a week. Probably with the total beginners, I'll do more 3 days a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I might
Hmm.
work some other more general stuff in on the Tuesday. Because like the beginners that come in, they're not going to do the same thing that my experienced kids will do. But
Yeah.
that's still I might have them come in and just do alternate stuff. Maybe it's body weight only or something while they're
Hmm.
learning. So there's a lot of different things all going on at once, depending on the level of the kid that's in the room.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you have, because you have kind of this, spectrum of kids and their experiences, are you having to program differently for the individual kids, or is it all just like while you're there, you kind of make the call based on maybe what they're needing?
Most of them, I'll have a team. I have a team program just because it's a
Hmm.
necessity within the sheer
Yeah.
numbers of kids that I have coming through the room. But I'll adjust. Like with the young kid, the young kids definitely get their own thing.
Hmm.
And with beginners, I might have them doing the same thing, but with, there's no weight prescriptions or anything like that because there's still
Yeah.
a lot of general. I mean, everybody's going to squat and press and things like that. So there's stuff that even if they're not advanced, they're doing the same exercise. It's just what they do might be different. There's not certain weights they're supposed to be doing. But
Yeah.
if the team is back squatting, then the beginner kid will back squat as well. It just
Yeah.
might be with an empty bar or something like that. So I kind of organize it like that just because I can't let it get too crazy. But
Yeah. Yeah.
really,
Absolutely.
I say the difference with the beginners that I'm calling all the weights. They're not working off a
Yeah.
predefined plan at that point. It's based on their technique and how they look, and that's how I'll progress them. And with the really young kid, that's also the same thing. They get watched a lot more carefully, and you know the volume of lifts that they do and the intensity of lifts is definitely lower, and they're watched.
Yeah.
Everything is scrutinized a lot more closely with the younger ones, or the more
I think that's
inexperienced ones as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach to like teaching anybody weightlifting anyways. Is usually, even if you're teaching an adult to like have a little bit of a structure to the program, but I try to get even my adults onto the team program as quickly as possible. One, because it organizes what I'm doing much more
Mm-hmm.
easily, but two, it already makes them feel like they're part of the team and that they're involved in something. And then, yeah, you can totally adjust the weights or have no prescribed weights. So ignore the percentages, ignore the numbers. Let's just work on the technical side of things. And then, and then we can always start doing the strength training right from the get-go. I mean, we can always
Correct.
put a little bit of weight on the bar for the squat, the press, and the pull. So they can be getting stronger, but then they might be doing a whole lot of repetitions of the empty barbell when it actually comes to snatch and clean and jerk. So you can, once that technical side kind of meets their strength at some point, I think that's where really when you start seeing kind of that merging and that climb in the athlete. But I think that's a good approach to just teaching anybody weightlifting regardless is, you know, I think it can get really, really tiring if all you do is technique work on snatch and clean and jerk. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you need to let them do some of the strength training just to see and feel some progression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
One thing
teaching
that
kids
really
is not
helps,
much different.
yeah. One
Go
thing that
ahead.
really that's helped really build my program too is that there's some times honestly where I got so many kids with the other sports in there that I can't watch the weightlifters very closely. So I'll tell them, you guys need to watch each other. I'll have my more advanced
Yeah.
kids help watch like less advanced kids, and they're
Hmm.
learning how to teach, and I might have the little guy my old 12-year-old kid in there and I'll put him with, one of my really advanced kids, and then I'll say, every lift that you do has to be watched by the older kid, and they'll help them.
Yeah.
And it just create this really positive environment. The kids are understanding things. It's just to build a good little community. And they're not so dependent on me all the time. They have to be, I have to trust you to be able to work diligently,
Yeah.
read the instructions that I give you. And, that's part of the program too. I'm at a point now where I kind of vet pretty closely what kids I bring into the program. So they got to be like a good direction follower and a self-starter, because I don't have time to be with you all the time with my situation. So it's created this environment where the kids really do a good job of helping each other and coach each other as well, because they've all learned the same exact system the same way, so they know what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I just tell them, if there's something we're working on in particular, they just focus on that one thing that day, and it's worked really well.
Yeah, that team dynamic is so important because, as a coach, you can't be watching every single lift every single time. Like, it's just not possible. And to have a team that, to have a certain athletes that have been around longer, that have more experience in it, to be able to pair up some of these newer athletes with them, and for them to be able to like ask them questions and develop that way, it just accelerates things. Because if they're always having to only spend their time, or getting information from their coach, it's also going to slow down the process. Mm-hmm. Because we're only accessible, we're not accessible all the time, but probably somebody that you're training with is. And then on top of that, I think there's such a good visual side of it. So for them to be training alongside a more experienced athlete, they're going to learn a lot just by watching that athlete move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. And one thing that helps too is the kind of working out in what I call a chaotic environment. A lot of times is my kids they're not, when they go to a national meet, they're not ever rattled by it. It's like being in a country club compared to what they're used to being. I mean, they're not all freaked out by people walking around them or anything like that. I mean, it's a huge upgrade compared to what the environment that they're used to. And they're not,
nice.
they don't act like babies, to be honest. They're pretty tough kids that have gotten, just working out in that environment. It's made them very self-sufficient, and they don't need me holding their hand every step of the way when they go through things. And that's been very helpful.
Yeah, that's cool. We used to talk about that in gymnastics, that we never actually wanted to train on the best equipment, the best floor, the best vault, or anything like that, because if you go to a competition, you go to a meet, and all of a sudden it's not as good as what you've been training on, it ended up being more difficult, and it kind of messed with you. So yeah, almost training in like that little bit more chaotic, dynamic during training, and then going to a meet and, all right, it actually feels a little bit more organized than what I'm used to, and there's not as many people here than what I'm used to. Like, it's almost like, okay, you feel more confident going into that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Let's see, any drills you recommend to help me get under heavy cleans? Somebody just asked a question. Do you have any go-to drills for somebody working on the pull under for a heavy clean?
A couple of my kids don't struggle with that issue because they do a ton of front squats and they do them from the very beginning, and I don't use power movements with the beginners really. Yeah, so they do full cleans right from the beginning. I would, if that's not the case and you're trying to backtrack, I'd say definitely start doing a full clean every time that you do it, catch it in the bottom position. Make sure that your front squat, there's a lot of ifs there, like what is your situation with your front squats and things like that. Are you comfortable in the bottom position? And, there's a lot of issues there, but, start by not doing power cleans anymore, force the issue.
Yeah.
And what I do with my kid, if I have a kid that struggles with that, I mean, like if they are power cleaning, they're not supposed to be, like every time they do that, they have to do a front squat. Yeah. Every single time, there's
catch it and then go into the front squat.
Correct.
Catch it and then go into the front squat. Yeah.
And you just keep working on it. It's not sometimes for some people, it's not an overnight thing, but I don't have a big issue with that because of the teaching process that I use. But we're talking about going under, going under heavy cleans.
People have a tendency to try to learn that power clean first, and they've only learned to move the bar up, and they've never learned to move themselves back down. And I do think that ends up being a sticking point. And so me, with my community, we get a lot of people transitioning from CrossFit. And CrossFit does a lot of volume of power cleans and probably
Mm-hmm.
much less volume of cleaning into the squat. And so I still teach it from the approach that you and I took, where I kind of teach it top down, because I like taking away some of their pull. So I like to teach them the clean from like the power position almost first,
Mm-hmm.
because now they can't pull the bar as high because they don't have all the time to accelerate. And but like you said, I've had a lot of people where I'm like, all right, no power cleans this entire cycle. Everything you do is into a squat. And you'd be surprised at like how quickly you do a 3-month cycle and now they know how to pull under the bar. And so I think you're right. I think just the main thing is start working into a squat, even if that's like you're catching high and then writing it down, just getting used to that. Every single time you catch it, sit into the squat. Every time you catch it, get into the squat. And that eventually, like you said, with your kids, you don't have an issue with it because that's how you did it from day one. So I think just hammering it like that and just making that your go-to, yeah, I think that's probably your best bet, is just repetition of always going into the squat.
A good drill you can add in. It won't necessarily help with heavy weights, but the tall cleans as well.
Yeah.
So you start flat-footed, legs totally straight, and all you're doing is just to pull under as fast as you can. The bar really, I mean, you're just pulling your body down. The bar is not really going up. That can be helpful for the timing aspect. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is they're light, so it's not necessarily going to help if it's just heavy weights that are your issue. But you could maybe start as a primer, using tall cleans right before you do your clean, so you're kind of priming
Yeah.
the fast timing under the bar. Um, Whoever asked that question, they could try that as well. Maybe do like 5 sets of 3 of the tall cleans before you go into your actual working sets for that day.
Yeah, what I do like about the tall clean and the tall snatch is exactly what you just said. It's like a primer, because what a lot of people don't realize in like the snatch and the clean is how much the arms actually do play a role in pulling yourself to the bar, or getting yourself underneath the bar. And those tall movements, you can't just like fall under the bar. You can't just drop to the ground. You have to like actively pull yourself down. And so when you take that ability to use the legs and everything to pull up, you start to feel the roll of the arms and the shoulders on that pull under. And I think just understanding, like getting that proprioception of like that feeling of pulling under is a really, really good primer. I love using those as, yeah, we'll do the same thing. 3 sets of 3, 3 sets of 5, tall, clean, tall snatch right before we go into snatches. And it's just to feel that aggressive pull underneath the bar. But that's a big one, I think, too, though, is people learning to actively pull to the bar as opposed to just like falling. A lot of times they just like pull as hard as they can and then they just kind of fall underneath the bar. That might be more of like a crashing issue than like you power clean every time. But yeah, I like those tall movements as primers. Let's see. Got I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I haven't gotten the warning that we're going to get kicked off yet. So what's your recommend? So you've worked with kids a lot. What would be your recommendation on like when they should start weightlifting? And because there's always that fear that weightlifting for kids is bad and they shouldn't start too early and that they can hurt themselves, growth plate issues, all that kind of stuff. So what's your, what's kind of your recommendation on the ideal time to start weightlifting? Or maybe if they do start early, is there an approach you do to like maybe how quickly we're going to be like adding weight and stuff like that?
There's not a specific age. It really comes down to maturity and your ability to follow instructions. That's what I tell parents. I mean, if the kid doesn't necessarily have to be for as long as an older kid, but if they can sit there for whatever duration we've agreed upon for that session and follow instructions diligently, that's usually the key. I mean, if they can do that, they're good. Like the 12-year-old kid I've been referencing, I mean, he started at 8 and he kind of had an uncanny maturity when it came to direction following, and just right away he was good. That's why I approached his mom about doing it, and he's been like that since day one. I mean, he's more mature than most of my high school kids in terms of following instructions and whatever I tell him to do, he does it. But not all kids are like that. So it really depends on that first and foremost. Now, as far as the safety, I mean, we could talk about that forever. I'll say this: there's always stuff coming out about this, but there's an abundance of information demonstrating that strength training is safe for youth. You know, even young youth. I'm talking 6, 7, 8 years old,
Yeah.
and even beyond that for the sport of weightlifting specifically for young kids. But the caveat
Yeah.
is that qualified instruction is taking place. It's done under qualified supervision, not just some Joe Schmo or something like that. That's really
Yeah.
the key issue there. But you know, if you just take a little time, just do a Google search for safety of youth strength training or safety of youth weightlifting, you can get a lot of good info there. A couple
Yeah.
people I'd recommend. There's a guy named Dr. Avery Fagenbaum. He's published a lot of stuff on youth strength training. If you pull his
Oh,
name
cool.
up, you're going to get a lot of good articles on the youth side of things. There's a really good review a couple years back by Mike Stone and Kyle Pierce back in
Hmm.
2017. It's called Children in Sport: How Hard Should Children Be Trained? That's another good one that kind of takes a lot of the most current data and synthesizes it and talks, and it has stuff about weightlifting specifically as well. But the
Very
bottom
cool.
line is it's very, very safe. I mean, I tell
Yeah.
parents this all the time, like, if you're worried about your kid doing weightlifting, I mean, you basically might as well have them. They can't do any sport because there's no sport you could choose to do that would be less safe or that's more safe than weightlifting. I mean, they talk about this in the USAW certification
Yeah.
course, and now there's a good little study they reference that compares injury rates per participation hours, you know, across multiple sports, and weightlifting is not even comparable in terms of how safe it is compared to some of the more mainstream sports. And just, you know, playing around on the playground, you know, for any little kid, it's probably you're subjecting the joints
Yeah.
and bones to more stress from just jumping off the bars or whatever than you are with weightlifting. And the thing with weightlifting too, I tell you, it's controlled. You know, you can,
Hmm.
and it's very scalable. So we can use bars. You know, they make 2.5 kilo bars. That's what my daughter started on. And you can use weights.
Yeah.
You put a half kilo weight on each side, and you barely have 10 pounds, and
Yeah.
you can go up in 1 kilo increments, you know. But you take a kid doing a contact sport, it's completely uncontrolled. They're running into another
Hmm.
human being, you know. So that's the good thing about weightlifting, or just
Yeah.
strength training in general. It doesn't have to be weightlifting. Kids can definitely do it safely. They just have to have somebody that knows what they're doing, kind of supervising the process.
Yeah. It makes me laugh sometimes that a parent won't hesitate to put their kid in soccer, football, basketball, but they'll hesitate to start doing weightlifting.
Hmm.
And I'm like, you do know that like yeah, everything is controlled. Like something's not going to there's not going to be like a freak accident unless, like you said, they're just kind of going off, trying to do it on their own. They don't have proper instruction or anything like that. But you find a good coach, they're going to make sure that they're not using too much weight, that they're getting into good positions, and it's very progressive. Like you also can't, you can't go too hard too quickly a lot of times. Like you're limited by the weights pretty quickly. Where
Hmm.
in football, you never know when you're going to get hit by a bigger kid.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. So
it's very, very safe. And there's no, they talk about the growth plates, injury to the growth plate. There's just no evidence that that's
mhm.
reality.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't, if you're listening to this and wonder about it, don't take my word for it. I mean, just look it up. There's a
Yeah.
lot of good evidence that says it's safe. I mean, basically every organization that deals with fitness has position statements on the safety of youth strength training. I mean, it goes on and on. Just look it up
Yeah.
if you're curious and need some. There's a lot of good things you can kind of keep handy to share with parents as needed. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation that's still kind of is out there that parents are scared about.
So you said a second ago that I thought was interesting, where you said the more important thing than like age is their maturity. When you're looking to maybe like vet or recruit um, weightlifters into your program, is is that the primary, as opposed to even saying this is the most athletic kid? Would you rather, is your first like go to like making sure that I know that this kid is going to be able to listen, follow instruction? Is that a more of a priority for youth, do you believe, than even maybe their general athleticism and maybe already strength or anything like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I do look at
Hmm.
if I see a kid that's particularly talented, like in my PE class, I'll kind of give you the process through PE at this point, because that's where I take most of the kids. You know, I see kids, because I teach the lifts in my PE class, so I'll start to see kids that are good at it. But I don't even approach them at that point. I mean, I want to see like how well they follow directions on a daily basis. I can look at their grades in the system. Like if there's a kid that's got F's in every class, I mean, first of all, they're going to be, you know, not eligible. They're at our district. If you're failing everything, you're going to get kicked out to the continuation school. So it's like that might derail the process right there.
Yeah.
And I usually like to see just their daily work ethic and attitude. Like, especially, this is funny. This has nothing to do with weightlifting, but in my class, once a month, I make all my P kids run the mile. And it's not because I care about their mile run. It's just something that's hard that kind of equalizes the grade for kids that aren't working hard. Because we'll do like conditioning workouts, kind of like CrossFit type stuff, just like circuit things a couple days a week with my PE kids. And it's just a way to keep them honest. If they're doing those workouts hard, they should be able to do a mile. Because the problem with my class is that, you know, when I have 50 kids in a weight room for a class, I can't monitor everything all the time to know whether you're really diligently doing everything. So it's a way to kind of bring everybody's grade to where they should be, kind of as far as earning it. But I'll look at their mile times. I've found kids that do well at doing stuff they don't like and is painful, it transfers well to doing something that's hard in weightlifting. If you're always tapping out and walking a mile because it hurts a little bit, you know, like usually I don't ask those kids to do it, because that same attitude I find comes into weightlifting whenever I ask you to do something that's hard or you don't like. So I want to see those kids that are going hard on everything all the time, that just have a great attitude and work ethic. And if they don't,
that's interesting. Yeah.
If they don't, I don't ask them to do it. I mean, or, you know, I say, or I'll tell them, you need to they might ask me about doing it, and I'll say, you're not ready. Like, I think of my class as an audition for the weightlifting team, and if you're not passing it, you got some work to do. Like, show me in my class, and then we'll talk.
That's really cool. I love how you're taking other aspects outside of weightlifting to also, you know, find what attributes really transfer over to somebody who's going to do good in that sport, because it is actually a really hard sport to do because it's very repetitive. So you kind of have to have a good, you know, head on your shoulders, a good mentality when going into something like weightlifting. It's not as all over the place and dynamic sometimes as, you know, a football game, but it's so that's cool that you're recognizing those things in kids early on, that this is what's going to also help them be really good at weightlifting, not just, you know, how they're built and, you know, how they move. That's really cool.
Yeah, and if they pass, you know, if they pass the character tests, kind of, that I call it, then I'll look at like I like what USA Weightlifting does in their course, like as far as the screening test. So I'll have them do a front squat, an overhead squat, military press, and then just a snatch grip deadlift, not just to see how they do. I'll use those as like a screening test, see if they can get in all the key positions. And if they can, you know, then maybe we proceed. But I've had kids too that, you know, can't pass that stuff. Like they can't even come close to doing an overhead squat, or they can't get in the starting position of a snatch grip deadlift. I've just told them, like, you're not ready yet. Like, you need to, maybe they might be on a sports team or something. You need to keep training with your team and working on this stuff, and we'll see how it goes. But I'll be honest, it's going to be an exercise in futility for you right now, you know, just because you're not physically ready to do this. You can't get in the positions. So I'll look at that too, but that's kind of on the back end of the character stuff that I look at first.
That's cool. Got a question here. Are weightlifting scholarships a thing in America? If so, what level would you need to be? This is actually a good question because we just literally last night or yesterday, Blaine, one of your kids that you started with at Lone Star, that ended up working with us during his senior year, just signed on with Lenore Ryan, Travis Mash's program, where they did have scholarship for him to go to college there and weightlift. But do you know, you might know a little bit more being in the school side of it. Do you know about kind of weightlifting scholarships and, you know, how many are out there, if it's much of a thing in the U.S. and U.S. colleges?
It is growing, USA Weightlifting. I know they're actively trying to make it better, and there's more than there used to be. Like when I first started, it's still not much. I mean, it's not comparable to any mainstream sports by any means. I'd say right now, if if we're talking about a full scholarship, like you got to be making like international teams for sure.
Yeah.
That's not to say you can't get partial money. And sometimes a lot of the programs right now are at smaller schools where you can get academic financial aid, which is good because it's not dependent on any kind of athletic performance. And you can go, and a lot of times they might not, while you might not be getting an athletic scholarship, if you're in the program at the school, they'll pay for travel and meet fees and stuff, which is still a
Yeah.
big deal. So, or they might help you with books or something like that. But,
Mm-hmm.
there are more programs out there than there used to be. There's probably some I'm not even aware of at this point. I haven't brushed up on some of the newer ones they've added. I know the one that Blaine went to is brand new. But
Yeah.
to tell you that there's a ton of opportunities, that wouldn't be true. But
Yeah.
there are some out there. But you do have to be to get actual athletic scholarship money, you're going to have to probably be pretty good. Like on the side
Yeah,
of
I totally
making
agree.
international teams, like a youth, Pan Am or youth world team or junior world team, something like that. The only
Yeah.
kid that I've ever had that's gotten a scholarship money was a kid that made the junior world championship team. And that was
Mm-hmm.
down at LSUS Shreveport. But other than that, most of my kids now, they go to school locally and they keep lifting for our program,
Yeah.
at the school here, and they just go to school locally where it's cheaper, and they've chosen to go that route, just because there isn't a lot of scholarship money out there.
Yeah, I think you're right though. We're definitely starting. I think the route that USAW is going is trying to really start building more of these university teams and getting them to the varsity level. We've been pretty proactive, here in Texas on getting a bunch of clubs started, which are good. It's a great start. So if you go to a place, you go to a college, check to see if there's a club there, because part of what the club fees also pay for are, traveling fees and, entry fees and stuff like that. So if you are competing at least like the national level, you're getting a lot of those things paid for, which is already a huge benefit to, weightlifting in general. If you've ever been a weightlifter and you're traveling 4 times a year, even
Mm-hmm.
just to go compete nationally, like it adds up pretty quickly. So a lot of clubs are popping up where a lot of the fees kind of go towards those athletes that are competing there on a little bit higher level and to their training. But I think we're soon to see a lot more varsity programs where there is going to be some scholarship money involved popping up too. I know that down in UT, they're just now transitioning that into a varsity program where some scholarship will be available.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be really surprised over the next 3 to 4 years if we don't start seeing a spike in the colleges that are offering some scholarship for weightlifters. I also think that as far as the level goes, probably to get any kind of consideration, yeah, you're probably going to need to be pretty competitive, at least nationally, to really get any kind of good money. I think you're right. At this point, you're going to have to be on that international circuit to really get some good
Mm-hmm.
money. But I do know that Blaine, got some scholarship. I don't know exactly how much it was, but I do know he got some scholarship towards his schooling. And, and he was pretty competitive on the national level. He hasn't done anything internationally. So, he's a good athlete, but not, that very, very small percentage of athletes that are doing the international stuff. So they're out there. You just got to look around and keep your eye out for more popping up in the future too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know USAW is targeting NAIA schools, so it's not NCAA.
Yeah,
NCAA is much harder to get into and deal with. So I know their efforts right now are targeting the NAIA schools, which are typically smaller schools. Um,
yeah,
that you'll find, there's if you just look up NAIA, but they're trying to get it as a varsity sport. I think at that level first right now, last I heard. I don't know if something's changed since then, but hopefully it does grow here in the next few years.
yeah, absolutely. Hey man, that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you jumping on here and taking your time to chat. Some really good
Absolutely.
information, a lot of good stuff about youths. I'll kind of put the word out there and see if we get some more questions on this topic. But outside of talking youth weightlifting, I think you and I could easily get on here and talk just about anything strength and conditioning,
Yeah.
weightlifting related, and we could easily kill an hour just chatting about, you know, general stuff. So
Yeah,
I think we
absolutely.
should definitely do it again sometime. But I really appreciate you getting on here and spending the time to answer some questions and get some information out there. It's super helpful.
Okay. Glad to help.
All right, man. We'll talk to
All
you
right.
soon.
Okay.
All
Take
right.
care now.
Later.
Bye-bye.